relevance of native speaker norms? That's a question for TEFLologists. Is it better to focus on form or to focus on forms? That's a question for TEFLologists. If you use a textbook, is your classroom authentic, or should your approach be more learner-centric, from feedback to learner autonomy? We'll discuss it all on TEFLology.
I'm Matthew.
I'm Rob.
And I'm Matt.
And welcome back to the TEFLology Podcast, a podcast all about teaching English as a foreign language and related matters, presented by three self-certified TEFLologists.
In today's episode, we want to talk about the two big issues which are affecting the world at the moment. Of course, the first of these is the mass protests happening in America and around the world, and the second is the coronavirus crisis. So today, instead of a regular 3-section episode, we're going to discuss those two topics together.
So recently, huge protests have broken out in America in response to the murder of George Floyd by police, with protests in support also taking place in other countries around the world. Japan, where we are based, has also seen anti-racism demonstrations in response to the treatment of a Kurdish man by police, and protests in support of Black Lives Matter have recently taken place in Tokyo and Kansai. This incident has acted as a spark for many long overdue discussions on race and racism, and this is as true in the field of English language teaching as it is anywhere else. Racism is in some ways baked into the foundations of the ELT industry. The spread of English itself is based in large part on histories of colonialism and imperialism and the identification of native speakers with particular nations, races, and models of English still leads to widespread discrimination against teachers, learners, and users of English all over the world. There is a large and growing body of academic work examining issues of racism, colonialism, and other forms of prejudice in ELT, but the industry has yet to fully face up to the darker side of its past and present.
So on this podcast, we've covered a number of critical issues in ELT, such as native speakerism, feminism, and special educational needs. And we've also interviewed Yuko Kubota on the topic of race and racism in ELT, in the process becoming somewhat more aware of the position we occupy. And while our position on these matters may be clear to those who know us personally outside of the podcast, and even to some of those who know us only through this medium, we would like to explicitly voice our support for the current protests and the ongoing struggle against systemic racial discrimination. But while we would like to talk about this issue further on the podcast, we also know that we each tick a lot of the privilege boxes, and on this topic, our own voices are not the most valuable. Instead, in this segment, we want to point our listeners towards some resources on race and racism in ELT, which may help them to come to a better understanding of the issues. In advance, we'd like to apologize if we mispronounce any names.
A good place to start is the book Race, Culture and Identities in Second Language Education, edited by Ryuko Kubota and Angel Lin. This book starts with an introduction defining concepts and laying out theories that are central to the topic. The chapters are then divided into 3 sections. Interrogating whiteness is the first section. Next, racializing discourse and identity construction in educational settings. And finally, toward a dialective of critically engaged practice. The chapters cover a range of topics and span a range of settings, moving from identifying problems to suggesting possible ways forward. For a more in-depth example of one particular context, Race, Empire and English Language Teaching, Creating Responsible and Ethical Anti-Racist Practice by Suanthi Mota would maybe be a good place to go next. We have unfortunately not read this book ourselves, but to quote from the description on Amazon, this timely and critical look at the teaching of English shows how language is used to create hierarchies of cultural privilege in public schools across the United States. Drawing on the work of 4 ESL teachers who pursued anti-racist pedagogical practices during their first year of teaching, the author provides a compelling account of how new teachers might gain agency for culturally responsive teaching in spite of school cultures that often discourage such approaches.
We would also like to recommend the work of B Gerald, who is currently working on the doctorate in education. He has an active Twitter account and also produces the Unstandardized English podcast. He has a couple of very interesting articles too, which are worth reading. The first is called Combating the Altruistic Shield in English Language Teaching, which discusses how teachers are often able to deflect accusations or even considerations of racism by pointing to the supposedly altruistic nature of their work. It reminded us of Kubota's paper called Unraveling Racism in a Nice Field like TESOL, which discussed similar ideas of denialism. His second article is called Worth the Risk Towards Decentering Whiteness in English Language Teaching, which is a kind of a short manifesto. It explains how whiteness is centered in ELT, the effects of this centering of whiteness, and suggests some ways we can decenter whiteness. Another upcoming name is Vijay Ramjatan, who has a popular Twitter account. He researches issues on ratiolinguistics, and in particular, he looks at how concerns about accent and pronunciation are connected to a set of racial hierarchies. His papers on this include Racializing the Problem of and Solution to Foreign Accents in Business. He has also researched microaggressions against racialized instructors from international students. According to the abstract of one of his papers, the findings describe the following microaggressions: interrogations of the teacher's nativeness, insinuations of their foreignness to English, and behavioral indications that they are invading the classroom. Their professional resistance either conformed to or sought to transform notions of supremacy of white Canadian teachers. He has also recently interviewed on the We Teach Languages podcast.
Nelson Flores is another researcher working in the area of ratiolinguistics, particularly looking at bilingual education and how histories of racial segregation of communities have negatively influenced the successful implementation of dual language programs. We would also recommend reading autoethnographical accounts written by those with lived experiences of these issues. With regard to academic writing about general education, one example is Ileana Cortez Santiago, Nastaran Karimi, and Zaira Arvelo Alicia's paper titled Neoliberalism and Higher Education, a Collective Autoethnography of Brown Women Teaching Assistants, in which the group navigate the systematic othering of minority women through unfair assessment of their work and the silencing of their voices that leaves them in a depowered and vulnerable position.
So these are just a few names and works that should help listeners to get into this area of reading. There are many more scholars working in this area, and we could also mention those such as Phillipson, Pennycook, and Kanagaraja, who have done important groundwork on the history of ELT in relation to colonialism and imperialism. But these are just a few things to start people off. We should also mention the group Women of Color in ELT, who provide a database of teachers and writers, as well as having put together a very useful reading list. We will put links to all of these in the description.
Over the years, this podcast has grown a following, albeit a modest one, but one that we assume expects a level of responsibility. We would like our podcast to be more than just an exercise in performative allyship, and instead, take steps towards authentic action. To that end, in this podcast, we will commit to putting more focus on issues connected to discrimination and racism. Also, in our Pioneers segments, we plan to move away from what could be seen as a Eurocentric Anglo-American perspective and towards one that is more representative of the contributions of teachers and writers from other parts of the world. We also plan to include more discussion of our own experiences of including topics such as anti-racism in our lesson plans and working against discrimination in our professional lives.
In this episode, we're sharing some of the resources that we're aware of, but we know that we're not experts in this area and that there's more writing out there regarding race and racism in ELT. As such, if any listeners have any materials to share, please let us know via email and we'll be happy to signal boost them on the next episode.
Okay, for our second segment, we would like to talk about an issue that potentially most of our listeners who are teachers are maybe sick of talking about and have had lots of conversations about this. But hopefully we can sort of explore some different areas of it. And that, as you can maybe imagine, is the shift to online teaching that many of us have had to undergo as a result of the COVID-19 breakout throughout the world. So maybe to start with, maybe we could just talk a little bit about what that shift has looked like for each of us. Rob, how was yours? Maybe I should say that here in Japan, we are, a couple months into our delayed semester, the start of the academic year now. So maybe, Rob, could you tell us how your semester has been so far?
Yeah, so I think I'm a little bit atypical compared to most of the people I've spoken to, in that the majority of my teaching is kind of on demand. I was going to say asymptomatic, but I mean asynchronous. It's asynchronous, and the reason for that. So I teach classes which are divided into two types at my university, which is seminar classes and lecture classes. And the seminar classes are quite small, and I've been doing those ones through, with live lessons. But the lecture classes don't have any cap on the number of students. So I have like 50 something students in each class. And basically it's kind of a bit too much to try and do that in a live lesson every week. So what I've been doing is, videos and written assignments with like kind of extensive feedback from me on all the written assignments each week. And that seems to have been working quite well. The students are doing the work and they seem to understand the language. And, it's not ideal, but, given the short time, we had to sort of get everything online and get a new plan in place and cut 2 lessons out of the semester and then put them back in later on. It's, it's going as well as could be expected, I suppose.
Okay, great. How about you, Matt?
Well, I've been just trying a mixture of things, really. Like before all of this happened, like this time last year, I was already using sort of an online kind of interface that our university has for uploading materials, administering tests, that sort of thing. So I've continued using that. And I think it was kind of underused previously in the university at large, but I think a lot of people have now started using that as well. And then I've also been using, obviously, the obvious Zoom in most of my classes. We did start off on another platform, but there were a few issues with that. So I'm now using one platform as a kind of a text-based kind of social networking platform, where the students kind of message each other, work on projects together in their groups. But I can kind of monitor and oversee everything. And then now I'm using Zoom for the live parts of the lessons. I've also been making videos. I think Rob's been doing the same. I've also kind of made on-demand videos, but I've kind of been using it as kind of half of the lesson. So I previously talked about like the flipped classroom approach. So I've been kind of introducing the content of the lesson in the first part in video form. And then using the second part of the lesson as more of a kind of a practice part of the lesson on Zoom. But I've been going completely over to the live side of things and just using Zoom for a lot of things. Yeah, but it's interesting. Like I asked my students recently what they preferred. Did they prefer a video lesson where they pause the video, work on activities at their own pace, or would they like to work with partners on Zoom on the same activities? And yeah, it was weird. One group said they preferred the live stuff. The other group said they were happy to do it by themselves on their own. So that's kind of one discovery I've kind of come across recently.
Yeah, interesting.
How about you, Matt?
Yeah, I'm in the position where I just started teaching at a new university, so sort of had to also get used to that. But we were given the option of basically we could do whatever we want. We could make our courses fully on demand and asynchronous, or ask students to attend full 100-minute Zoom lessons if we wanted to. But we were told we could do pretty much whatever we want on whatever platform we want. Because all of my students this semester are first-year students, and this is their first experience at university, I did want to give them the opportunity to interact with each other, make friends, and have some of the experience of being sort of, in a class. So I decided to have have lessons at the appointed lesson time with all of my classes on Zoom. Lessons at my university are all 100 minutes long, which is, I think, pretty typical in Japan. But I end up spending, I'd say the average is maybe 50 minutes, anywhere between 40 minutes and an hour. Sometimes we go a bit over that, but it seems to be working. And then obviously a lot of work is done offline or it's online, but in their own time. So I just end the lesson by saying, here are assignments. You can find this on Moodle, which is the what do they call it? LMS, the language management system that we use.
Learning management system. I think.
Learning management. And yeah, so what I find is, I don't know. I guess I think the sense I get from my students' experience is that it's sort of half and half. It's half of that lesson is online and the other half is what they do in their own time. Yeah.
I think it's interesting. Like, one thing I've found kind of annoying, as someone who's done a lot of online learning myself, like my master's was online, and my PhD was not online, but it was part-time while I was living in Japan, so it was very similar to doing it online. It's that, in Japan, and I think in a lot of other countries, universities have tended to kind of paint online learning or distance learning as, kind of a less good option. Say it's not as good as being in the classroom. It's not as good. You're not learning as much, that kind of thing. And I think in some countries, it's difficult to get jobs if you've got a degree that was done through online learning. But now the universities, there was some universities in Japan, there were some universities that were kind of advertising their students, oh, we're going to give you just as good an experience through these online lessons as we are in the classroom. And they're not because it's online learning, but because they've had no chance to organize things properly, and they've not been preparing for this for years and that kind of thing. And I just think it's interesting that now the universities have to try and sell themselves on the quality of their online courses when they've been denigrating them for such a long time.
Yeah. I wonder if there will. I wonder if this will continue. Next year or the year after, if there will be an online element that will continue, or if they'll just go back to kind of sidelining it and kind of forgetting about it.
I get the feeling like what I'm hearing from my own university is that they're going to start making more contingency plans for online learning, so that it's much easier for them to get everything online if they need to, but they're not going to make it like a main thing. You see what I mean?
Yeah. I guess one big issue is that attending classes is just one aspect of being a university student. And all the other stuff, in Japan, most students, I guess, join clubs or what they call circles, which are sort of social groups, but based around a certain activity or whatever. And then just being on campus and socializing and meeting friends and that kind of thing is an important part of the experience. So I think even if they did get to the point where they could deliver an experience that's just as good as being in the real classroom, I don't know if they would, unless the cost differences made it worth their while, which never count that out, I guess.
Yeah.
So I had a few questions on this topic. The first one, it's a 4-part question, and it's a big question, so it really allows us to talk about anything. But just anything that comes to mind in terms of sort of, I guess, pros and cons for teachers and students of online teaching or online learning.
I came across one today, actually, that I haven't
a pro
fully...
or a con?
A pro. That I haven't... Well, there's lots of cons, but there's more cons than pros, I think. But I came across one today that I haven't fully looked into yet, but So, like in a physical class, obviously, when I'm testing groups of students, um, I'm testing one group, but the other students are waiting to be tested. So there's always a lot of kind of downtime, and the students aren't really using the time effectively, and by and large.
Right.
But I found a way on Zoom that means that I can assign a recorder in each of the test groups so that they can all kind of record their breakout rooms simultaneously.
Mm-hmm.
And then basically I've got all of their recordings of their conversations that I'd like to assess all in one place at one time.
Mm.
And it's, yeah, for me, I tried it today with one group. I said, can you just record this and send this to me later on?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it recorded just their breakout room session.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I'm kind of thinking, okay, well, if I tell all my groups to start at this one time and finish around the same time, we've wrapped it up in, half the time that I need. And, I think, and I'm going to be able to kind of watch it closely later on. And yeah, so that's one big kind of breakthrough I've had today, actually. So.
Yeah, I think that's a nice use of the technology.
Mm.
Yeah, it's like kind of it's a very small thing, but kind of similarly, just when I had students, practice writing topic sentences for paragraphs, but then they could all just put their sentences into the group chat.
Yeah.
And then we can, I mean, you could do it in the classroom. Everybody comes and writes it on the board, or they say it to you and you write it on the board, but it just takes a long time. Just within a minute, you can suddenly see everybody else's sentences that they've come up with.
Yeah, and there's also an option to download that chat as well, I think.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, so that's another, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
How about you, Rob?
Pros or cons?
Oh, we'll decide.
Okay.
No, I don't know. No, up to you. Up to you.
So for my students, it's kind of difficult to say. Like the students who I think are, are kind of good students and they're working hard, and they're sort of committed to, and I guess they're able to work hard with their home situations, seem to be kind of getting on with things well. I don't think it makes, they're making the best of it. So I don't know. It's difficult to say whether things are a pro for the students or a con for the students, because you'd have to ask the students,
Yeah.
I think sometimes what I consider a pro, they might not, and vice versa. For me, I guess one of the pros is mentally, it's been quite nice being at home, not doing the big commute into work in the morning and the big commute home at the end of the day, and that's actually allowed me to focus more on my lessons. And actually, the fact that every day I'm sitting and writing feedback to students, reading their assignments and writing feedback, I feel like I'm engaging more with the work of each individual student, with the language of each individual student, than I was when I was teaching, a room full of 50, 55 students who are, discussing things in groups, where, for a lot of the time, especially when you've been teaching the same course for a long time, you can kind of zone out a little bit and drift around the classroom and that kind of thing. And I feel I'm engaging a lot more now with what they produce, with what they say, and I'm learning a lot more about them because, they write about their experiences and their beliefs and their ideas. And I didn't pick that up when they were just one voice in a sea of 50 voices. But now I engage with each one individually. So I think it's kind of a pro for me. I'm sort of rediscovering aspects of my teaching, and learning a lot more about my students than I would have done otherwise. A con is that, the course is called Advanced Oral Communication, and it's mainly being done through them writing scripts and things like that. But again, it's choices dictated by practicality. Yeah.
So that pro that you mentioned of spending more time engaging with the students' output, I guess in this case their written output, is that something that you might try to carry over to when you are back in the classroom in some way?
Yeah, I think so. Matt mentioned, this, or I think both of you mentioned the learning management system. We've got one which I never used before. And then I was asked to make some instructional videos for the part-time teachers on how to use it. So I had to learn how to use it in about 3 hours and then make videos telling everyone else how to use it. But I've actually found that really useful for managing work and for doing quizzes and things. And I think I could save a lot of classroom time by doing that. But also, I think I'm going to get the students to start submitting their assignments through there and make them more regular assignments so that I can maintain that engagement with their individual voices.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
Yeah. I mean, it's been completely paperless so far. And there's no reason why that can't continue. Like everything, because there's no need for any sort of paper really. I guess the students are using their notebooks, and I mean, there's been a couple of times where I've asked students to take pictures of their notebooks and upload them as an image.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm trying to get the students away from that and get them more to, saving them as PDFs or typing them up as documents. But yeah, I think the paperless option is another thing. Like Rob said before, like connecting with individual students again. I've done a few audio recordings for the students.
Mm-hmm.
Where I've got the students to introduce themselves,
Yep.
and it's nice to just kind of listen to them speaking. And that's something you don't get to do one-to-one in the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I agree with you about this this idea of learning more about the students through the writing and the speaking that they submit. But at the same time, I also feel like I don't know them as well as I would if I was in the classroom with them. Like I'm not as good at putting names to faces. And I have about 20 students in each of my classes, which isn't that many really. But still, I've just started the third week teaching. But even today, I saw looking at some of the students on the grid and thinking, I don't know if I would have, if I passed you in the street, I don't know if I would know that you were one of my students. And I guess there's maybe just another con for me is I feel like, and maybe it just takes time, and maybe this is something that teachers who've been teaching online for longer have already reached a point where they can do. But I feel like I sort of improvise less, or I'm less creative while I'm actually teaching. I feel like I can be very creative when I'm planning the lessons, and I enjoy that side of it. But while I'm teaching, I make sort of less in-class decisions about things to change based on how the students are reacting to what I'm doing. It's starting to happen a little bit more, I noticed even today, but it's still less than it would be in the classroom, I think.
Yeah, I found that you can't really be kind of spontaneous, and things take a lot longer. I'm trying, although it's difficult, but I'm trying to put sort of fewer activities into my classes.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the students just want to be put into a breakout room for longer lengths of time and just work. And things take longer because of the internet and that kind of thing. And I don't know. I think in the initial weeks, I was kind of treating it like a regular class and just kind of stopping activities after 2 or 3 minutes. And I think it was getting a bit too much for everyone. But I agree. It's difficult to kind of make those decisions in the moment. I guess that's what I want to say. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Have you felt any kind of stress from having this kind of discussion, you guys? Because I've been trying to avoid, like on Facebook and that kind of thing. I've noticed there's lots of discussions about what other people are doing. And I like reading those. I find very stressful because I feel like people are, I don't know. I feel like what I am doing is working, and I'm, doing the best I can. But reading other people's ideas, I'm kind of sitting thinking, should I be doing that? 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 And it's very annoying. If I was teaching in like in a team of people, we'd probably be having those discussions. But it just feels like in the situation, I kind of don't want that stress, you know. 'Cause it's less like, hey, we're all on the same sort of page, and here, you know, we're sharing ideas. It feels, in some ways, it feels like people are doing kind of a display, you know. Hey,
Yeah.
here's this great thing that I'm doing. Yeah, and I don't know, it gets on my nerves a little bit.
Yeah, that happened with me the other day. Like I sent an email to our group of teachers saying, "Oh, how are you guys doing this particular project? Here's how I'm doing it." But nobody replied with any of their own ideas really. And yeah, like you said, it kind of came. Feel it came across from me as me saying, "Here's how I'm doing it, and what you guys should be doing this too," kind of thing.
Right.
But nobody kind of rose to the challenge and gave
Right.
their own idea, and they all ended up saying, "Oh, this is great, really good, great." But I don't know. That wasn't really the point of what I was trying to do. But
Yeah, I think like I don't think anyone is actually trying to like flex on each other, you know, and show off.
Yeah.
But I think because there's a heightened tension in the whole circumstance under which we're doing this, online teaching. And yeah, I don't know. It's just maybe a personal reaction. But I don't appreciate those discussions that much.
Right. I think, yeah, in a way, it's maybe just an exaggerated version of what we do already, or what happens anyway, amongst language teachers and maybe other kinds of teachers. I don't know. But yeah, I think I completely, sympathize and empathize with what you're saying. But I also sort of, I guess, tried to make the decision, or trying to not let myself feel like whatever I'm doing. I mean, I kind of feel like that anyway with my teaching. Like I'm always thinking, I'm sure there's 100 ideas out there that I'm not doing that would be good for my students. But this is what I do, and this will have to do. Yeah, I don't know. And there's obviously those teachers out there who for years have been, interested in using technology more in the classroom and that kind of stuff. And their time has come, and they can crow a little bit. I think they have that right to sort of show off everything they know about it. But
Although,
I think,
given the circumstances, it might be a bit gauche to show off too much.
Perhaps, yeah. Like I told you so kind of thing, you mean?
Yeah.
Right. I told you this was gonna happen.
You weren't interested in my ideas, but now there's a pandemic. Look who's coming to Mr. Call over here.
Do you guys like something that's really again, something from today? Like I feel like I'm sitting down too much when I'm teaching now, and I never usually sit down. In fact, I'm always on my feet.
Yeah.
So I think from now on, I'm gonna try and teach standing up.
Standing up. That's probably a good idea.
Yeah, just or maybe, I mean, I've started going into my office, and then there are classrooms down below me. I could just go into a classroom and take in the air of the classroom, and
Yeah.
I don't know.
Maybe one final word on what you were saying there, Rob, is this past weekend was the ChildCALL Conference.
Yeah.
So for the non-Japan-based people here, JALT is the Japanese Association of Language Teachers, which we've referenced many times in the past, and then CALL is their computer-assisted language learning, SIG. And they had their conference over the weekend online. And I didn't actually know about it. I mean, I'd maybe seen something about it, that it was happening, but I didn't know about it until somebody posted something on Saturday when it was already on. But I thought, yeah, I don't really want to. I mean, first of all, like I spend all my working time sitting on my computer anyway, and so I didn't want to spend the weekend doing the same. But also, maybe I had a little fear of what you were talking about, Rob. It would just be talking about all these people talking about all these wonderful things they're doing with their online classes that I'm not doing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I watched a couple of presentations, mainly about podcasting. So it wasn't really much to do with any of the stuff we're talking about, really.
Yeah.
But it was a very well-oiled conference. Actually, it worked very well as an online conference.
Well, I mean, if anyone's going to pull off an online conference,
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Connected to what Matt was saying a little bit before about standing up, I realized when I was teaching a class the other day, I started out the class with quite good posture, and I realized by the end I'd really slumped down in my chair and I looked like a proper slovenly idiot. So I'm trying now to sit very straight and look like an actual teacher, not someone mumbling drunkenly into a microphone.
Yeah.
You save that for the podcasts.
Yeah.
Although I actually feel that I speak more. Yeah, maybe like we were saying before, because I don't feel like I know the learners all that well. I still feel like I'm really making an effort to kind of craft the way I kind of present points and stuff like that. So I feel it may have some effect on the way that I introduce instructions, for example.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
also,
I mean,
also we're online, so I need to be as clear as possible. I think that's the main point, really.
I guess, I mean, one of the big things that people have been talking about is the sort of learner autonomy aspect. And I think one thing I've been sort of pleasantly surprised at is how self-sufficient my students seem to be. I talk at them for however long each lesson, and then give them time to interact, and then say, okay, here are your assignments, go off and do them. And expecting a flood of emails saying like, what are we supposed to be doing exactly, or how am I supposed to do this? And I get 1 or 2 emails after each lesson asking those sorts of questions, but for the most part the students seem to they seem to know what they're doing, or they can figure it out by themselves at least. Maybe
your assignments are too easy.
Possibly, yeah. I mean, I was worried that they were too hard, and they seem to, but it's maybe not necessarily in terms of how well they do on the assignments, just whether or not they know what they're supposed to be doing.
I was worried about my students kind of cheating in a way, because like Matt said, what I often do is, well, what I do for every lesson is I make a video and a worksheet. And like, this is for every class. If I have a live lesson, the live lesson is kind of the cherry on top of that, where they do their practice and stuff. But basically they have the video, and the video contains instructions like, I'll explain something and then say, okay, now please pause the video, go and do task A and submit your answers through our learning system. And that's, the first quiz. And so the video usually has like 3 or 4 break points where they go off and do a task. And I was thinking that they, a lot of them, like, for example, the vocabulary test, the idea is, in the reading class, they're meant to be guessing words from context. And we studied that as the first reading skill. And, I know that there are problems with that skill, but whatever. But I was thinking, obviously they could just go and look those words up. They don't have to. But, at the same time, I think, but, that's kind of up to them. Like, if they actually care about learning the skill, then they'll do it. If not, they'll go and look it up. And, at the end of the day, the only person who's getting hurt there is them.
Right. Yeah.
So.
Some of my students, when I get, online stuff, or putting their answers into a Moodle quiz, whatever, I get a lot of the same wrong answers. And so I think, I wonder if, somebody's done this and then shared it with everybody else to submit.
Yeah.
But again, I don't get that upset. At least they're, communicating with each other, and at least they're submitting something. And
yeah. I've had a few students submitting written assignments that have been copied from places. And because I'm doing these browser-based submissions, they write directly into the the little box, so they're not copying out by hand. And one of them, well, someone submitted some work which had all the Wikipedia superscript numbers left in. It's like blank text.
Does Turnitin? That's an easy one for Turnitin, I guess.
Right. Yeah. So I don't know. I think to an extent it can encourage that kind of thing, but I think that's also a good chance to do a bit of writing workshop. Like, hey, I noticed this in your text, and here's how you could avoid this in the future. Which is what I think that's good use of things like Turnitin as well, right? It's not supposed to be there to penalize; it's there to help people improve their writing and stuff. But again, I also kind of feel like if I was a student and I was in this situation, if I had to submit, I don't know, 100 assignments a week for all my classes, I'd probably cheat on a few of them as well.
Yeah, you look for shortcuts. Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that was this episode's talk about online teaching, which will be the same topic for the next 10 episodes of TEFLology, probably. So we hope you enjoyed it. Okay.
Thank you for listening to today's episode.
And if you'd like to get in contact with us, you can do so by emailing us at TEFLology@gmail.com. You can follow us on Twitter at TEFLology. Visit our website, TEFLology-podcast.com. Like us on Facebook. You get the drill, I think, by now. And going back to our first section, all of the references and resources we talked about will be providing links to that in the podcast description and also on our website too. And also, if you have any resources of your own that you'd like to share with us, please do so. Please send us an email. So thank you very much for listening. We'll be back with a regular episode soon. So it's goodbye from me.
Goodbye from me.
Goodbye.